Marcus Reed had survived 3 years of the invasion without firing a single shot in anger, which was something of a miracle. Considering the galaxy had decided humanity was the newest punching bag on the cosmic playground, the Kryn Empire had arrived with their warships and their superiority complexes, expecting humans to roll over like every other species they'd conquered in the past millennium. They hadn't counted on humanity's bizarre talent for making absolutely everything more complicated than it needed to be. Marcus had been working as a mediator in the occupied territories, one of the few humans trusted to negotiate between the resistance cells and the Kryn occupation forces. It was thankless work that usually ended with someone threatening to shoot him, but it beat getting vaporized in the initial bombardment. Like most of major cities, he was in the middle of arranging a prisoner exchange in the ruins of what used to be Denver when she appeared, Commander Vex of the 3rd Assault. Legion was 7 feet of scaled muscle, crimson armor, and a reputation that made hardened resistance fighters reconsider their life choices. She'd personally led the charge that broke the Australian defense line and had reportedly killed a rebel commander with her bare hands just for the challenge of it. She was also, according to every report Marcus had ever read, completely merciless. So when she walked into the negotiation chamber, dismissed her guards with a gesture, and pointed directly at him, Marcus assumed his number was finally up. "You," she said in perfect English, her voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through his chest. "You are the one they call the Peacemaker." Marcus set down his tablet carefully, trying not to let his hands shake. "That's what some people call me, yes. I have observed your work," Vex continued, circling him like a predator. "You are clever, resourceful. You have survived situations that would kill most of your kind." "I prefer talking to fighting," Marcus said, watching her movements carefully. "Less permanent consequences." Vex stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he had to crane his neck to meet her eyes. They were golden with vertical pupils, and they studied him with an intensity that made him feel like a specimen under glass. "Among my people," she said slowly, "strength is valued above all else. But there are many kinds of strength. The strength to fight is common. The strength to prevent fighting when warriors are baying for blood, that is rare." Marcus blinked. This was not how he'd expected this conversation to go. "3 times you have negotiated ceasefires in my sector," Vex said, beginning to pace again. "Twice you have prevented massacres. Once you talked down a suicide bomber who had already armed his device. You did this with nothing but words." "That's kind of my job," Marcus said cautiously. "It should have been impossible," Vex replied. "The bomber was Kryn, one of my own soldiers who had lost his clutchmates in a human ambush. He wanted revenge. He wanted to take as many of your people with him as possible. And somehow you convinced him to stand down." Marcus remembered that day vividly. The soldier had been crying, his scales flushed dark with grief. Marcus had simply sat with him and listened while the man talked about his clutchmates, about growing up in the military creches, about the letters he'd never gotten to send home. In the end, the soldier had disarmed the bomb himself. "I just listened," Marcus said. "That's all anyone really wants sometimes." Vex made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Just listened." As if that were simple. She moved to the window, looking out over the ruined cityscape. "Do you know why the Kryn Empire has conquered 200 worlds, human? Superior technology? Bigger guns? Because we are very good at breaking things," Vex said quietly. "We are warriors, bred and trained from birth. We know 10,000 ways to kill, but precious few ways to live." She turned back to him, and something in her expression had shifted. "When I watch you work, I see someone who has mastered what my people have never learned. You build bridges where we would only see targets." Marcus's mouth had gone dry. "Commander, I'm not sure what you're getting at." Among my people, we have a tradition, Vex said, and now there was something almost hesitant in her voice. When a warrior finds someone who possesses qualities they lack, someone who makes them stronger by their presence, they issue a claim of intent. A claim of what? A declaration of courtship, Vex said, and Marcus's brain briefly short-circuited. I have observed you, Marcus Reed. I have studied your work. I have seen your strength, different though it is from my own. And I find myself intrigued by the possibility of learning from you, of perhaps teaching you in return. Marcus stared at her. The most feared Kryn commander in the Western Hemisphere had just asked him out. You want to date me, he said flatly. I want to explore compatibility, Vex corrected. Among my people, this process is quite formal. There would be ritual combats, tests of skill, evaluation periods. I'm going to stop you right there, Marcus said, holding up a hand. I'm a mediator. I negotiate. I don't do ritual combat. Which is why I find you fascinating, Vex said. She moved closer again, and this time Marcus noticed the way her tail coiled and uncoiled, a nervous gesture he'd learned to recognize in other Kryn. You would not survive our traditional courtship. It would be absurd to even attempt it. Which means if we are to proceed, we must create something new. A courtship of words instead of blows. Of understanding instead of dominance. You do realize this is completely insane, Marcus said. Your empire invaded us. We're at war. And you're talking about courtship rituals. Love has started wars before. Vex replied with a sharp grin that showed all her teeth. Why should it not also end them? Marcus opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. She had a point, bizarre as it was. What exactly would this courtship involve? He asked carefully. Conversation, Vex said. You would tell me about your world, your culture, the things that matter to humans. I would do the same. We would learn each other's languages, both literal and metaphorical. And if we find common ground, if we discover that our differences complement rather than divide, then perhaps something more could develop. And if we don't? Then we part as friends who tried something unprecedented, Vex said. No obligation. No dishonor. Simply an experiment in bridging two very different worlds. Marcus considered this. It was perhaps the strangest proposal he'd ever received. But then again, the past 3 years had been nothing but strange. And if there was even a chance that this could lead to better understanding between humans and Kryn, wasn't it worth exploring? Besides, underneath the armor and the reputation, Vex seemed genuinely curious about him. Not as a specimen or an oddity, but as a person. Okay, Marcus said slowly. But we're doing this my way. No ritual combat. No tests of strength. We start with coffee. Coffee? It's a human beverage. Bitter, caffeinated, and somehow essential to most diplomatic negotiations. If we're going to figure out if two people from species can build something together, we might as well start with the basics. Vex's expression shifted into something that might have been amusement. Coffee, she repeated, testing the word. Very well, Marcus Reed. Let us begin with coffee. Though I warn you, Kryn biochemistry processes stimulants differently than humans. I may require significantly more of this beverage. I think I can arrange that, Marcus said. And despite everything, despite the war and the occupation and the sheer absurdity of the situation, he found himself smiling. 3 months later, the image of Commander Vex and the human mediator Marcus Reed sharing a table at a rebuilt cafe in downtown Denver would become the most famous photograph of the entire war. It wouldn't end the conflict overnight, but it would start conversations that had seemed impossible before. Not all of those conversations would go well. There would be resistance from both sides, anger and accusations, and very real danger. But Vex and Marcus would navigate it together, teaching each other, learning each other, building something new from the ruins of old hostilities. Years later, when asked about how it all started, Marcus would simply say he'd been picked by the most dangerous warrior he'd ever met, and she'd turned out to be looking for understanding instead of conquest. And Vex, when asked the same question, would reply that she'd found the only human strong enough to teach a warrior how to make peace. The truth, as usual, was somewhere in between.